Hello and welcome back. I sort of feel like this course is really broken up into three sections of learning. First, we discuss some networking basics and how to leverage the socket and threading module to create a very basic terminal chat room. Next, we built on those ideas and included the tkinter and JSON modules so we could create a full-blown chat application where we sent not just strings through our sockets, but Python objects like dictionaries. In thinking about how I wanted to end this course on sockets and networking, it was very clear that I had to show you how to make a multiplayer game. Talking with your friends over the network is cool, but battling them in a game is essentially epic. So in these next videos, we're going to lay a foundation for the Pygame module, which will help us make a game, and then we'll incorporate everything from sockets, threading, and JSON into our game so we can take the game online. Now, I have a whole course on Pygame, so if you've taken that course, you can probably skip these next few introductory videos, or you can watch them for a quick refresher. And if you're interested in learning more about Pygame and making some really neat 2D sprite-based games, please consider watching that course. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is actually make sure that Pygame is installed. So Pygame does not come pre-installed in Python like our other modules, so we have to install it. So to do this, we're going to open up our PowerShell or our command line or some sort of interface like that, and we'll type, we're going to use pip, the Python package installer. So to see what is installed currently, what packages are currently installed with pip, you just type pip freeze, and if I hit enter, you can see I have no packages installed. And that actually makes sense because I installed everything, all of my Python I installed it, and I did a fresh install at the start of this course. So let's get the Pygame package. We'll install it. So to do that, we'll type pip install Pygame. So I'll click enter here, and it's going to do its thing. And it looks like it says it's successfully installed Pygame version 2.1.2 at the time of recording this video. So now if I type pip freeze, hopefully we'll see that package installed. And there it is, Pygame version 2.1.2. Excellent. So now we have a Pygame installed. Let's go create a new file. So I'll come over to Visual Studio Code. I'll do File, New File. And I'm going to save this in my directory where we have been working, so my Python socket examples. But here, I'm going to make a new subfolder. So I'll do right-click, I'll do New, and I'll do Folder. I'll call it 5, and I'll call it multiplayer underscore game. So this will be our multiplayer game folder. I'll come in here, and I'll simply save this as Pygame underscore intro.py. So I'll have to give it that py extension here so we know it's a Pygame file. Perfect. So now that we have that, let me put a little comment up here. We'll say Pygame tutorial. The first thing that we want to do is we'll begin by importing Pygame. So we'll say import Pygame. Now, when working with Pygame is crucial, the first thing that you do is you initialize the Pygame module. And this will allow us to do things like create windows, add specific fonts and text to the window, and control different events, like game events that we're going to be talking about. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to initialize the Pygame module. And to do that, we simply call Pygame, and we call its init method. So we'll do pygame.init. Okay, perfect. Now that we've done that, let's set some game constants that will help us control the game flow of the kind of tutorial game that we want to make. So we'll say set game constants. So first, we'll set a window width and window height here. So we'll say window width, and I'll set it to be 600, and we'll set window height, and I'll set it to be 600. Arbitrary values for right now. And we'll use these to create our game window. And let's also set a round time constant to be 25. And we'll use this as sort of a variable that will control a timer for how long an individual round of our game should take. Next, let's define some colors that we can use. And here, we're going to use RGB tuples rather than hex codes to define our colors. So I'll define black, and so as a tuple, and the red channel I want 0, and the green channel I want 0, and in the blue channel I want 0. And I'll define white. All right, so white would be in the red channel 255, and the green channel 255, and in the blue channel 255. And then I'll define a color, I'll call it player color. And I'll just pick some arbitrary values. In the red channel, I'll do 125. In the green channel, I'll do 55. And in the blue channel, I'll do 200. So if you look, we got lots of blues and a good amount of red, not a lot of green. So red and blue, this is probably going to be some kind of like purple color. Awesome. So now, here's a really important part. When making games, we typically have something known as a main game loop that will continuously run as the game is being played. And each iteration of the game's of our game's main game loop will do things like check for user input, update our characters, move them across the screen, maybe update and rewrite things to the game window, like what our score is or how many lives we have. And really, depending on the speed of the computer, its processing power, this main game loop could run at different speeds. And we don't want that. We want to control the speed of our main game loop. Well, we can do that by defining a variable. We'll call it FPS, or frames per second. And so I'll choose 30 for this one. So we'll say FPS is equal to 30. And now what we're going to do is we'll use this value, our frames per second variable, in conjunction with a clock object. And essentially what will happen is we're going to create a clock, and at the end of our game loop, we are going to tick our clock or advance our clock using our frames per second. And this will control essentially the speed of our game loop. It's going to delay the next iteration of our game loop until that clock is ticked, and then we'll control how fast our game loop is running. So we have to create one of these clock object. So I'll say clock is equal to, and to do this we call pygame.time.clock. So we're going to create a clock object. Perfect. The last constant I'll create here, or the last variable I'll create, I'm going to create just a font that we'll use in our game. And so to create fonts that we can then render text to the screen, we'll define a font. We call pygame.font, and I'm going to use a system font, so .sys font. And these are fonts that are typically pre-installed in most computers. And so I've just picked one here. I'm going to use Gabriola. That's the name of the font, and then we have to specify the font size. I'll specify a font size of 28. Awesome. With all of our constants created, what we now should do is actually create a game window that is going to open up for us. And so this is going to be the window, or I'll call it a surface, with which all of our other items are going to be placed. So like our player, our fonts, our text that we render, all of that stuff. So let's call this, we'll put a comment here, we'll say create a game window. We'll call this display surface, and it is going to be, we're going to get it from our Pygame module, so pygame.display. And now the first thing we have to do is we're going to set its mode. So we'll set the mode, and here as a tuple we have to specify the width of the window and the height of the window, or the width and height of the surface. Well, we have some constants variables here to control that, so we have window width and window height. So we'll pass those in. We'll say window underscore width, comma, window underscore height. All right, perfect. And while we're here, now that we have this display surface, let's change some of its attributes. So maybe we'll do like pygame.display.set caption, and here we can put a caption. So we'll say, I'll do some squiggly lines. Oops. We'll say pygame tutorial, squiggly lines. All right, so to alter our display that we just created here, the display surface, we can call pygame.display.setCaption, and that will do that nice. So everything looks like it's set up. So let's run this. If we run this right now, what's going to happen? So we run it, our window opens up, and then our window immediately closes. What a terrible game, right? This is because essentially we don't have a main game loop yet. There's no loop that is infinitely running to keep our window open. So let's actually write that main game loop right now. So we'll come down here and we'll put a comment. We'll say, comment, the main game loop. So we're going to use an active flag. We'll call it running, and we'll set it equal to true to control the duration of our while loop. So we'll say, while running, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing we should do in our game loop is check to see if the user wants to quit. And that means, how do they indicate that? Well, they come up here and they hit this little X button in the corner of our game window. Now, in Pygame, something like clicking our X, or maybe a mouse click, or a key press on the keyboard, these are all known as events. And all Pygame events in any iteration of a game loop are placed in a queue or a list to be processed. And so here what we want to do is we want to loop through that list of events and check to see if one of those events was a quit event. A quit event would be given by pressing this X. If it is, we want to change our flag variable running to false so that we break out of this while loop. So let's see how to do that. So we'll say check to see if the user wants to quit. So we're going to loop through a list of events. So we'll say for event in, and now we have to get that list of events. So we're going to say pygame.event.get. So that will get all events in the queue. And now we want to check to see if that event's type, so if event.type is equal to a quit event. And we indicate that by saying pygame.quit. If that is the case, that means the user has indicated that they want to exit the game. They've hit that little X. We'll set our running variable to false. Perfect. That should work out wonderful. Now, I'm just going to give a little warning. When you call pygame.event.get, it empties out the whole queue. So any other events that are in this queue will be removed from the queue because they think they're going to be processed. And right now, we're really only worried about quit events. So anything else in here might be emptied out and it might not get processed. Right now, it is not an issue at all, but it's important to note, and it's something that we're going to pay attention to maybe coming up in the future. So what else should we do here in our main game loop? So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to back out of our for loop. Well, we're going to update our display. Every iteration of our game loop, we should update our display. So we're going to want to do things like we're going to want to change our player's position. We're going to want to update our score, all of these great things. And really, when we do that, we always want to start with a blank surface, right? We just want to start with a blank surface. We don't want to like have our character appear here, and then in the next iteration, we're going to have our character still appear here and then move them over here. We have to draw to the screen every iteration of our game loop. So we're going to start always by filling the surface. So we'll fill the surface with a background color. So our surface is called display surface, and we'll call the .fill method on this. And what color do we want to fill it in? I'm going to fill it in with the black color that we supplied right here. Perfect. So that's going to give us like a nice starting canvas that we can later draw all of our game assets to. Now what we'll do is we'll update our display. So when we officially like draw to our screen and we do things like maybe move our character's position or update our score, it's the update method that will essentially push all of those to the surface. So we have to actually call the update method here to do that. So we'll say update the display. And we'll also tick the clock at the end of our loop, and we'll talk about that in a second. So how do we update our display? You call pygame.display, just like we did up here, pygame.display, and now we'll call .update on this. And it takes no arguments here, so this should work out really nicely. And then lastly, at the end of our loop, we're going to delay the next iteration of our loop for a certain amount of time so we can control how fast our game is running. And to do that, we access the clock that we created. So we created a clock up here, and we'll call clock.tick. We'll call the tick method. And then we got to ask ourselves, okay, how long do we want to tick for? How long do we want to wait for? We're going to use our FPS variable here of 30. FPS. All right, perfect. So if I run this now, hopefully what will happen is our window stays open. Let's see. Hey, look at that. Our main game loop is running because our window has stayed open. Now, this is not that great of a game because our game loop's not really doing much, but one thing it is doing is every iteration it's checking for an event, a quit event. And so let's actually give it a quit event right here, and let's see if the window closes as we expect. Perfect. So that is awesome. Everything is working up to this point. I think this is a great place to stop. We'll continue building on our Pygame tutorial in our next video. So I will see you then.